Have you ever found yourself in the devastatingly confusing situation where a man who seems to truly love you suddenly pulls away? To understand this painful paradox, we must venture deep into the human psyche, using the brilliant work of Carl Jung as our guide. Together, we will explore the powerful subconscious currents that drive him, delving into the elusive reflections of the anima, the feminine archetype that lives in the depths of his soul, and confronting his instinctive, primal fear of being consumed by the very thing he desires most. Jung's analytical psychology provides us with a master key, one that unlocks the profound understanding of how love awakens not only our brightest light, but also our darkest, most hidden parts, what he famously called the shadow. If you have ever lain awake at night, tormented by the question of his silence, I urge you to prepare yourself. The answers you seek lie far deeper than you can imagine, buried not only in his soul, but in yours as well. This kind of contradictory behavior, especially in romantic relationships, can feel like a maddening puzzle. When a man who loves you inexplicably distances himself or ignores you, it's almost never a simple case of him losing interest. More often, it is a powerful, unconscious reaction to internal forces that are raging far beyond his conscious control. Jung called this phenomenon projection. It's a psychological mechanism where we unknowingly cast a hidden part of ourselves onto another person. When a man falls deeply in love, he often projects his anima, the idealized internal archetype of the feminine, onto the woman he loves. Without realizing it, you become the living, breathing embodiment of everything he seeks, everything he fears, and everything he desperately needs to integrate within himself to become whole. This process can be incredibly overwhelming for him, because as he projects his idealized image of you, he also projects his shadow. All of his suppressed fears, his unhealed traumas, and his deepest insecurities are suddenly brought to the surface, reflected back at him in the mirror of your relationship. True love, you see, is a powerful catalyst for what Jung called the journey of individuation, a path that forces us to confront our subconscious and integrate both our luminous and our rejected parts. In this intense psychological climate, ignoring you becomes a desperate defense mechanism. He pulls away not because he doesn't care, but precisely because he cares too much. He is terrified because he doesn't know how to handle the profound, soul-level transformation that this love is demanding of him. His distance is a direct reflection of the war raging within him, the primal desire to merge with you versus the paralyzing fear of losing his own identity in the process. Therefore, you must learn to see his silence not as a personal rejection, but as a powerful sign that your connection is touching the deepest, most vulnerable layers of his soul. If he loves you but ignores you, it's likely he is facing the greatest challenge of his psychological journey, learning how to love without completely losing himself. A love this deep is more than just an experience of joy and connection. It's an intense, unforgiving mirror that reflects all of our hidden pieces. When a man truly loves, the feeling triggers not only his loftiest dreams and desires, but also his deepest wounds and most terrifying fears. This is his shadow at play. According to Jung, the shadow contains everything we have suppressed or rejected throughout our lives. The impulses, emotions, and aspects of ourselves that we pushed into the darkness because they didn't fit our ideal self-image. When this man encounters a woman who awakens something real in him, he unconsciously projects both his light and his darkness onto her. This is precisely why, instead of drawing closer, he often retreats. True love doesn't just invite surrender, it demands a radical transformation. It's as if his soul instinctively knows that to love you fully, he must first face every demon he has spent his life avoiding. The fear of dissolving into you, of relinquishing the defenses he has painstakingly built over a lifetime, can become far more powerful than his desire for connection. And so, he distances himself. The urge to ignore you, to isolate himself, or even to act cold, is an unconscious, desperate attempt to protect the fragile identity he feels crumbling under the perceived threat of your love. When love activates his shadow, he finds himself standing on the edge of an internal abyss. He is faced with an impossible choice: confront his wounds, or cling to the familiar safety of what he knows. And because most people are not emotionally equipped for such a profound confrontation, they often choose to flee. In this light, his silence is not a reflection of a lack of love. On the contrary, it signals that what he feels for you has awakened something so deep, so powerful, that he simply doesn't know how to handle it yet. While his withdrawal is undeniably painful for you, it is also a sacred invitation, a call for both of you to look within and understand what this powerful connection is truly reflecting. When a woman can grasp that his withdrawal might be the result of his own inner war with his shadow, she can finally stop personalizing the abandonment. It's crucial to remember that true love is always a journey of individuation, a process where both partners are invited to become more authentic versions of themselves. If your bond is truly deep, it will inevitably stir up old childhood wounds, inherited patterns, and survival mechanisms. This isn't a sign that something is wrong, it's a sign that something real is happening. Without crisis, there can be no transformation. What he truly fears is not the relationship itself, but what the relationship awakens within him: the undeniable need for change, for healing, and for the integration of his own shadow. This is both the exquisite beauty and the profound pain of a love like this. It touches the soul not just to unite, but to reveal. By understanding the psychological roots of his behavior, you reclaim your power. Not the power to control him, but the courage to choose how you position yourself in the face of your own pain. Jung identified the anima as the feminine archetype residing within a man's psyche, an inner image shaped by his life experiences with women, especially his mother. When a man is unconscious of his own anima, he can't help but project it onto the women in his life. In his eyes, you become the symbol of everything mysterious, sensitive, and emotional, all the qualities he was never encouraged to recognize or cultivate within himself. For a masculine ego that has learned to equate strength with control and emotional distance, this intense contact with the inner feminine can feel incredibly threatening. When he looks at you, he doesn't just see you. He sees everything he has ever desired, everything he secretly fears, and everything he has never known how to name. Initially, this projection can be intoxicating. He places you on a pedestal, seeing you as unique, perfect, almost magical. But as the relationship deepens and your authentic, beautifully imperfect humanity begins to emerge, the projection starts to crumble. This is when the disappointment sets in, not because you've changed, but because you were never the fantasy he projected onto you in the first place. He begins to realize that what he fell in love with was not something to be found in another person, but an inner image that he needs to reintegrate within himself. This realization can trigger an emotional collapse. The fantasy shatters, and in its place, fear, discomfort, and withdrawal rush in. It is absolutely vital for you to understand that this complex dynamic is not your fault. Perhaps the most powerful and loving thing you can do is to give him the time and space he needs to confront his own journey. In the meantime, this is also a perfect opportunity to examine your own projections. What were you expecting him to be for you? What idealized role was he fulfilling in your own psyche? Understanding the concept of the anima allows us to reframe his withdrawal, seeing it not as a rejection of you, but as a sign of his own internal crisis. When a man loves you and yet ignores you, his seemingly illogical behavior is a psychic defense against the parts of himself he has not yet learned to embrace. For many men, their emotional language was silenced early in life. So when true love arrives, bringing with it the profound need for genuine connection, their default response is to shut down. Their defense is silence. Their strategy is to flee. He is terrified of dissolving into the relationship, of being overtaken by feelings he can't name, and of becoming dependent on something he can't control. This is why, even while loving you, he ignores you. Because true love requires surrender, and surrender may be the very antithesis of everything he has been taught about being a man. When your love activates his shadow, his fear of abandonment, his insecurities, his neediness, he is confronted with pieces of himself he doesn't even recognize. His silence becomes a desperate attempt to avoid falling apart. As Jung wisely said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If a man doesn't understand the true reasons for his withdrawal, he is destined to repeat this painful pattern in all of his relationships. But by understanding this behavior as part of a much deeper dynamic, you can begin to transform your pain into wisdom. When you are faced with the silence of a man who loves you yet pulls away, you can feel lost in an emotional hurricane. But hidden within this pain is a sacred invitation, a call to awaken. The awakened woman is not a woman who is immune to pain. She is a woman who chooses not to lose herself within it. When she understands that his behavior is not the definitive measure of her worth, she powerfully withdraws her energy from the wound and reclaims her own center of gravity. The silence that once felt unbearable now becomes a sacred space for inner listening. Instead of asking, "Why is he ignoring me?" the awakened woman turns inward and asks, "What is this absence trying to show me about myself?" This shift in focus is life-changing. Instead of desperately seeking validation from him, she begins to observe her own vulnerabilities, her attachment patterns, her idealized fantasies of love, and her own deep-seated fears of abandonment. She stops trying to force answers from him, understanding and respecting that his silence is part of an internal process that only he can resolve. Paradoxically, his withdrawal creates the very space she needs to return to herself, to strengthen her own identity, and to rewrite her emotional story from a place of profound maturity. The awakened woman also has the courage to recognize her own shadow, realizing that she may have projected her own needs for a savior, for an absent father, onto him. By bringing these projections into the light of her own consciousness, she frees herself from being a hostage to unconscious patterns. It takes immense courage to turn silence into awareness. It's far easier to blame him than it is to look inside and acknowledge the old wounds his absence has triggered. But it is in this very confrontation that a woman's true power is born, a power that doesn't seek to dominate, but to embrace, observe, and transform. She learns when to lean in and when to let go, understanding that true love is not about clinging, but about liberating. And so, even when faced with his absence, she does not dissolve, she expands. When a woman reaches this state of consciousness, the entire dynamic of the relationship shifts. The real transformation happens when she stops living in reaction to him and starts living in alignment with her own truth. The awakened woman knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that she deserves a love that does not silence her. Her ultimate role is to remain fiercely loyal to herself, and to wisely choose what and who is truly worthy of her presence. In this way, his silence ceases to be a punishment and becomes a profound teacher. Love, after all, is not merely a meeting of two people. It is a revelation of two souls. And when he ignores you, even while he loves you, it is perhaps because he is at war with the parts of himself he does not yet know. His silence speaks of an inner universe that is confronting him with everything he has yet to understand about himself. And it is only when you can embody a love that is not an escape, but a powerful returning to your own center, that a true, conscious relationship can finally blossom. Let's delve deeper into the heart of his retreat, into the quiet, often misunderstood landscape of the male psyche. When confronted by the overwhelming power of genuine love, he doesn't know how to express the profound emotions stirring within him because, in all likelihood, he was never taught the language. For many men, their innate emotional vocabulary was systematically silenced from a very early age. They were handed a script that prized stoicism over sensitivity, logic over feeling, and control over connection. They were taught that to be a man was to build a fortress around the heart. So, when a love that is real, raw, and transformative finally knocks on the door of that fortress, it doesn't feel like a welcome guest. It feels like a siege. This love brings with it an undeniable need for a real, vulnerable connection, and his lifelong conditioning kicks in. He shuts down. His most practiced defense is silence. His most reliable strategy is to flee. He is paralyzed by a primal fear of dissolving into the relationship, of being completely invaded by a tidal wave of emotions he cannot name, let alone navigate. He is terrified of becoming dependent on something so beautiful, so powerful, that he ultimately cannot control it. And so, even while a part of him deeply loves you, another part of him ignores you. It's a tragic paradox born from a fundamental conflict. True love requires surrender. It asks us to lay down our armor and be seen. For a man who has been taught that this armor is his only source of strength, surrender feels like self-annihilation. This is where we must speak of the masculine shadow. This shadow, as the great psychologist Carl Jung described it, contains all the parts of himself that he was taught to disown and repress because they were deemed unmanly. It holds his deep-seated fear of abandonment, his hidden insecurities, his suppressed wells of anger, and most threateningly, his own profound neediness. For his entire life, he has learned to project an image of self-sufficiency. Your love, in its authenticity, bypasses that projection and touches the raw, vulnerable truth beneath. It activates these dormant feelings, and he suddenly finds himself confronted with a stranger within his own skin, a version of himself he doesn't recognize and has no tools to manage. His silence, then, becomes a desperate, instinctive attempt to avoid falling apart, to hold the cracking fortress together just a little longer. Jung offered a solemn, almost prophetic insight. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This isn't just a clever psychological theory. It's a fundamental law of the human experience. If a man does not, or cannot, understand the deep-seated reasons for his pattern of withdrawal, he is destined to repeat it. He will go from one relationship to the next, unconsciously recreating the same scenario of sabotaging a deep connection, forever calling this recurring tragedy fate or bad luck. But for you, The woman on the receiving end of this painful dynamic, understanding this behavior as part of a much larger, archetypal pattern, is the first, crucial step in transforming your personal pain into profound, impersonal wisdom. Let's be unequivocally clear. When you are faced with the silence of a man who claims to love you yet withdraws, the pain is real. It is not an overreaction. It is a disorienting, heart-wrenching emotional whirlwind that can leave you questioning your sanity, your attractiveness, and your very worth. But what if I told you that hidden within the very heart of this anguish lies a sacred, hidden invitation? What if this agonizing experience is actually a powerful call from your own soul, a call to a higher level of consciousness? This is the pivotal moment where you encounter the archetype of the awakened woman. The awakened woman is not a mythical being who is immune to pain. She feels every ounce of the heartbreak and confusion. The difference is that she makes the conscious, powerful choice not to lose herself within that pain. The moment she can truly internalize the truth that his behavior is a reflection of his inner war, not a definitive measure of her worth, she begins a radical act of self-preservation. She lovingly and intentionally withdraws her energy from the wound. She stops allowing her life force to bleed out into the black hole of his silence, and, with immense grace, she repositions her own center of power. The silence that was once an unbearable, deafening roar of rejection now transforms into a quiet, sacred space for deep inner listening. The frantic, outward-facing question of "why is he ignoring me?" finally falls away. It is replaced by the inward-facing question that changes absolutely everything. What is this absence trying to show me about myself? This shift in focus from him to you is the most profound and life-altering move you can make. It is the beginning of your true journey. Instead of desperately seeking answers and validation from a source that cannot provide them, you begin your own courageous inner excavation. With a newfound sense of compassionate curiosity, you start to observe your own inner landscape. You notice your patterns of attachment, your tendencies toward anxiety or avoidance. You see with clarity the idealized fantasies of love you've been clinging to, the unconscious ways you might have been auditioning for his love, hoping to be good enough to finally be chosen. You begin to untangle your own deep-seated fears of abandonment that his withdrawal has so painfully triggered. This awakened woman does not try to force answers from him. She does not chase, beg, or demand an explanation. She develops a profound respect for the sovereignty of his journey, understanding that his silence speaks of a complex internal process that, ultimately, only he can resolve. Paradoxically and beautifully, his withdrawal creates the very space you need to fully return to yourself. It becomes a sacred container for you to strengthen your own identity, separate from him. It's an opportunity to heal your own wounds and to consciously rewrite your emotional story from a place of profound maturity and self-love. The journey continues as the awakened woman also recognizes her own shadow. She has the courage to ask the difficult questions. What unconscious needs was I projecting onto him? Was I seeing him as a savior who could rescue me from my own life? Was he a stand-in for an absent father whose love I was still trying to win? By bravely bringing these hidden images into the light of her consciousness, she liberates herself from being a hostage to unconscious patterns passed down through generations. Transforming silence into awareness requires a warrior's courage. It is far easier to obsess over his behavior than it is to look into the mirror he provides and acknowledge how deeply his absence has activated our own oldest, most tender pains. But it is in the heart of this very confrontation that a woman's true power is born. This is not a power that is aggressive or dominant. It is a power that is receptive, embracing, observing, and ultimately transformative. She learns the subtle, graceful art of knowing when to insist and when to let go. She comes to understand in her very bones that true, conscious love is not about clinging, but about liberating. And that is why, when faced with his absence, she does not dissolve, she expands. She uses the space to grow, to create, to connect with her own purpose. When a woman fully enters this state of consciousness, the entire relational dynamic changes. The real transformation occurs when she fundamentally stops living her life in reaction to him and starts living in beautiful, unwavering alignment with her own truth. The awakened woman knows, with a certainty that radiates from her core, that she deserves a love that does not silence her, that does not require her to shrink. Her primary role is no longer to be his therapist or to manage his emotional world, but to remain fiercely loyal to herself and to wisely choose what and who truly deserves the gift of her presence. And in this magnificent process, the man's silence ceases to be a personal punishment and becomes an impersonal teacher. It becomes a catalyst for her evolution. Love, you see, is not just a meeting between two people. It is a revelation. It reveals every unhealed part of us, every place where we are not yet free. So, when he ignores you, even while loving you, know that he is likely in a profound, silent conflict with the parts of himself he has yet to meet. His silence speaks of an entire inner universe that is confronting him with everything he has not yet understood about himself. And it is only when your love for yourself becomes your anchor, when your own life ceases to be an escape and transforms into a sovereign space you joyfully inhabit, that a conscious, healthy, and extraordinary love finally has the room to blossom.